The Tom Woods Show, episode 752.
Prepare to set fire to the index card of allowable opinion. Your daily dose of liberty education starts here. The Tom Woods Show.
Folks, if you enjoy the smackdowns of the bad guys here on the show, then you will really enjoy my book, Real Dissent, which I think is some of the best stuff I've ever done. It's a fat book, and it's only 4 smackers on Kindle. Plus, you can get the audiobook version for free with me reading it. Check out the details at realdissent.com. Hi, everybody. Tom Woods here. We are doing a post-vice presidential debate analysis, and I'm telling you, I just should not have done this to anybody. This was just a terrible, terrible mistake. After we talk about this, let us never speak of it again. Joining me, as always, is Lew Rockwell, founder and chairman of the Mises Institute, to my mind, the most important organization in the world. He publishes LewRockwell.com, which I read every day. He's former chief of staff to Ron Paul, and he's here to talk about Governor Mike Pence and Senator Tim Kane. Lew, good morning.
Tom, how are you doing?
Well, this is terrible. I just had no idea how terrible this was going to be. I mean, this was so unwatchable.
Tom, if we weren't doing this show, I would have turned it off. In fact, it was so bad that occasionally I had to turn the sound off to be able to just keep watching.
It was so unwatchable. I just thought to myself, what did I do to Lew, making him do this? And the only reason, really, that we did this one is to make up for the fact that both of us actually are going to be unavailable for the second debate. And so we thought, presidential debate, so we thought, all right, well, we'll at least do this one. Oh, gosh. But on the other hand, I feel like it's the one good thing was that I got to know Mike Pence a little bit better in that I see, I thought he was a total drone. Okay, let me give you my impressions, and I'm going to throw it over to you. Because the consensus, even in the mainstream media, is that Pence won the debate, and Kane was annoying, interrupting all the time, and he just seemed obnoxious, whereas Pence was very much in control, relaxed, respectful. And I don't think there's any question about that part of it. But for people who thought Pence was impressive, you've got Kane uttering these totally inane economic platitudes that are just terrible and stupid, and Pence cannot land a devastating blow. All he can come up with is, you guys want more taxes and spending and we want less taxes and spending, like he's arguing something back in 1983. It was just talking points. He couldn't land a decisive blow because I think he basically is a lightweight. What did you think about, just on this surface level, how it went?
I think there's no question that Pence is, you're praising him to call him a lightweight. Even worse than being a lightweight, he's a neocon lightweight. So I thought he just reminded me of everything bad about conservative Republicans. Yes, we're going to cut taxes, cut spending, and make everything, well, sure they are. And we're going to start a war with Russia. Those horrible Russians, they're doing this, they're doing that. We need to have a no-fly zone in Syria, protect Aleppo, and all, he sounded like a stupid version of Bill Kristol. On the other hand, he won on demeanor. Kane was, Kane is known for being, or at least his reputation. I must say this is the first time I ever even saw Kane. So he's known for being allegedly very calm, controlled, and not excited or excitable. So did Hillary's Dr. Feelgood give him a drug last night? I mean, something happened so that he was very hyper, as you point out, couldn't shut up, kept interrupting. So he definitely lost on the demeanor point. But who the heck watched this whole thing except you and me?
Yeah, I know. By the end, it really was the Nielsen people will discover there were just 2 people by the end. And by the way, Lew, I feel bad saying Kane was terrible because because of course we have our friend the wrestler Kane,
the good Kane.
Yeah, that's right, the good Kane, who is a Ron Paulian and a good guy. No, we're talking Kaine. Yeah, I in my notes I wrote down Kane never shuts up and is condescending and annoying. And I felt like almost every time he was asked a question, he gave some irritating rehearsed speech. And Pence made occasional reference to that. He said that one must have taken you a while to rehearse. I mean, we could all see that about Kane. He knew that he had his talking points, that he had to get in there one way or another, and doggone, he was going to do that. Well, the thing that I think most set me off was really right away. Right away, Kane gave this, again, obviously, everything was canned last night, totally canned. He said, in Hillary Clinton, you'll have a "you're hired" president. And in Donald Trump, you'll have a "you're fired" president. How, I mean, really, if I were leaning Democrat, I would have felt insulted. But my intelligence, I would have felt like he was insulting my intelligence with a dumb line like that. And then he said, here's our plan. You're going to have debt-free college. For some people, you're going to have free college. We're going to raise the minimum wage. We're going to have equal pay for equal work, which you already have right now, so that's just bunk. We're going to invest in infrastructure and green jobs, and then we're going to ask, Lou, those at the very top to pay some more. They're just going to ask, and maybe those people will say no, and they'll have to try something else. What do you think about this laundry list of things?
Well, since Trump keeps making the point that this would be the third Obama term, seems to me Kane proved it last night. Everything he said was just warmed over Obama. And even Bill Clinton, pointed out that he thought the Obamacare was crazy. And this is true of all their policies. They are crazy, and people are sick of Obama, and to the extent that, just from a practical political standpoint, to the extent that they can hang Obama around Hillary's neck and Kane's neck. And of course, Kane, for those who are sort of into politics, Kane maybe has slightly more importance than the normal VP candidate because people wonder if Hillary will survive her term were she to be elected. So I think a lot of people look at Kane and think, he could be the president. I don't think anybody except Mrs. Kane would say that's a good thing. Maybe not even she. Right.
You mentioned the comment by Bill Clinton. Let's take a minute to mention that in case people haven't heard that. Bill Clinton on the stump for his wife made this remark about Obamacare, saying it's the craziest system in the world. It's a system where a lot of middle-class people are finding their benefits, their insurance coverage cut in half, but their premiums are doubling or their premiums are going way up. It's the craziest system you've ever heard. What do you think is behind that? I mean, I know there's no love loss between Clinton and Obama, but what do you make of that?
Well, the Clintons are very, very aware that everybody hates Obamacare. If anybody still likes Obama, if anybody's going to support Hillary as the Obama choice, they're going to have to ignore Obamacare because everybody is dissatisfied. The whole thing is a disaster, even by government medical standards. So I think this was a deliberate. This is not a gaffe, except because, of course, the famous definition of Michael Kinsley, the gaffe is speaking the truth by mistake. I think he spoke the truth, but it was not by mistake. He wanted to separate, and this was all planned. The Clintons wanted to separate themselves from Obamacare. All she has said is, well, I'm going to make it better. Well, but I think people are, if the Obamacare plays any part whatsoever in this election, she's toast. So I think that was not Bill going off the reservation or all the things they're claiming. This was a deliberate separation. It was maybe a Sister Souljah moment.
Yeah, now that's funny. A lot of our listeners weren't even born when the Sister Souljah thing came up, but that was Clinton's attempt to separate at least his wing of the Democratic Party from the victimological wing that even if somebody's – now, they say she didn't really say let's go kill white people or whatever. But, I mean, she said something that if a white person said it about blacks, he'd never be heard from again. So I'm not really interested in splitting hairs about what Sister Souljah said. But Bill Clinton came right out and just said there's no room for this kind of hatred anywhere. And, of course, the hard left hated him for that. But he's a smart politician, and that's why he did that. Now, given all these inane things Kane is talking about here, I'm gonna link at tomwoods.com/752, which is the show notes page for today, to episodes I've done on the gender pay gap, which does not exist. It's a total figment of the media's imagination. That is complete crap. So I'm going to talk about that. Episodes on the minimum wage, infrastructure, and green jobs. I mean, this is just this is nothing to that. David Stockman has a really good chapter in his new book arguing that no, actually the bridges aren't falling down. The only reason people say that is if you look at the collective total of all our bridges, some of them have some issues, but most of them are like some tiny covered bridge in rural Iowa that 3 donkeys go over once every 5 weeks. They're not. It's not like your bridge that's connecting you from one part of San Diego to another. It's not. It's not that. So that stuff needs to go. So I'm gonna have all that stuff. But what I thought was interesting was Pence said, or I beg your pardon, Kane said that we got the recession, we got the crash in 2008 because we'd had this low tax environment, that we'd lowered taxes and had this trickle down approach,
Yeah.
and he thinks that causes recessions.
Well, who knows what he actually thinks? He's a trained liar, like all these apparatchiks who are successful within the state. But this is just the line he was told to spout, or maybe he spouted it on his own. This is just the fact that they're would like to drastically raise taxes, the Clintons, in maybe the Republican tradition, unfortunately, doesn't he's afraid that people are not going to like that. So if you cut taxes, as Trump is talking about, it'll bring on another bad recession or depression. And if you raise taxes, as Hillary is talking about, you're going to take care of the bridge that's going to fall out from under you when you cross from New Jersey to New York. So this is, again, a calculated thing. I must say I don't think it works. I don't think there's any American, except, of course, the commies, who believe that people are undertaxed. Certainly nobody thinks he is undertaxed.
It's always other people.
Well, yeah. I mean, it's those horrible, successful people who are – I mean, even the whole – Trump business, that isn't it an outrage that a guy who had no net income didn't pay any income tax?
Yeah, right.
Well, that's of course. I mean, this is. That's why I don't think the tax thing works. And I think that Kane was highly ineffective. But especially even if you'd done nothing but just watch the debate without the sound on the whole time, he really came across as very creepy. The way he would screw up his face and slit his eyes when he was about to tell a whopper. And of course the fact that he wouldn't shut up and that he wouldn't stop interrupting, and with the help of course the very unimpressive lady who was quote unquote moderating the thing last night. I think they didn't. I don't think that they did not win. On the other hand, what does this debate matter in that sense? I don't think anybody is going to make a decision based on this debate. But Kane didn't help himself, and he didn't help his ticket. And if you think of what is the first thing, if you're a vice presidential candidate and you're in something like this, you don't want to hurt the ticket. I mean, that's first do no harm. Kane, I think, did some harm for anybody who was paying attention, but Tom, was anybody but you and me paying attention?
Yeah, I don't know, but there are people talking about it on my Facebook feed. But on the other hand, I have weird friends, so you can't extrapolate from that. On this, getting back to this income tax thing and income tax rates and recessions, what Kane is expecting us to believe is that we got the downturn of 2008 because the top marginal tax rate was lowered from 39.5 to 35%. So that almost imperceptible change yields us that. Meanwhile, I note, if I may, that there are many things we could. In fact, I'll have a whole episode on this. Why not? I've got a whole episode linked at tomwoods.com/752 on this whole thing about when taxes are high, everybody's doing great, but when taxes are low, the economy goes crazy. It's just there's nothing to this at all. But in 1932, Hoover raised the top marginal tax rate from 25 to 63, and 1932 became the worst year of the Great Depression. So I could, if that were all there was to the world, I could just cite that back to Kane and say, well, what's the deal there? John F. Kennedy cut the top marginal tax rate. There was no obvious depression resulting from that. So that doesn't make any sense. The trouble with Pence, as I said, is that he just doesn't have the knowledge to other than talking points to really smash this guy. He doesn't obviously has no idea who David Stockman is. He could have come back with, look, we haven't had a single net breadwinner job created in this country since the year 2000, since Hillary's husband left office. I mean, you're going to brag about that record. You can talk about 15 million new jobs. These are either replacement jobs that were lost at the trough of the business cycle, or they're jobs that most people don't want. These are not things to boast about. In the middle of your recovery, you have Kane was pathetically trying to say, well, from 2014 to 2015, there was a slight uptick in, against the poverty rate or something. But Pence could have said, we still have 43 million people on food stamps. How can you say that that's good? But I thought he was totally ineffective. The guy, as you say, Kane is totally unlikable, but Pence can't land the decisive blow because all he's got is talking points from 1983. Very disappointing.
Well, I think he's, I hate to praise Kane, but he's smarter than Pence. Pence is definitely a low IQ guy. I mean, he just, there's not much there. He has a great demeanor. He looks great, and he does what he's told by the people who put him into office. But otherwise, there's just no there. So, yeah, he was not an effective debater. But again, people, I'm afraid, make decisions based not so much on what these guys say, as how they look and how they behave. And Pence won it on those grounds. But he's I don't want to say he's a boob, but he's known in Indiana as just not being smart. So I thought we saw that last night. The first time I've ever seen Pence, except just in passing. So I thought he was very unimpressive. On the other hand, they picked him because he looks great, and he doesn't get he's unflappable, which is a very good thing in these kinds of things. And Kane was flipping instead of being unflappable, he was flipping out during the entire time, made him very unlikable. And I would guess virtually nobody watched the whole thing except us and other people dragooned into this. But I think for the people who watched it, of course, you can't really. I always loved the Drudge poll, although it's just the Republicans. But I noticed that he had the people there were saying that Pence had won it by 95. I mean, 95% said called for Pence, and so then very few people thought that Kane won it, especially because there were some undecideds. So I think I guess Kane is smarter. Maybe he's more evil. I don't know. It's tough to think that. I mean, because of course Pence's foreign policy comments were just horrendous. Again, they were.
Oh yeah, we got to talk about that. Yeah.
Yeah. Just like something out of the Weekly Standard, calling for war against Russia. It's always good to remember when they're talking about, the Russians are going to come and get us, they're going to take over the world. Russia's got the GDP of Italy. I mean, this is a small country in economic terms that was battered is not quite the word for it, for all those years under communism. So much destruction, so much horror, so many deaths. It, of course, has not recovered. It probably is going to take many more years for them to recover. It's, to the extent that the Russian government is a threat to anyone, it's a threat to the Russians. But it's not, whereas the U.S. government is a threat to Americans and a threat to the whole world. So the idea that, we've got to protect Aleppo and stop the humanitarian tragedy. And of course, this is exactly the Republican talking points, because who's causing the humanitarian tragedy? In Aleppo, it's the terrorists that the U.S. supports. And just as we know that the U.S. had something to do with the beginning of ISIS, and they've helped fund al-Qaeda to take down people they don't like. This is the way states are. This is not just the U.S. The Romans were like this. The British were like it. I'm sure the Babylonians and the Assyrians were like it. This is the way empires behave. But for Pence, I don't know. I find it alarming because, of course, one of the few things I like about Trump is that he's less of a warmonger than Hillary, and so is everybody. I guess less of a warmonger than Hillary. But the fact that he was Mr. Warmonger last night and seemed to desperately care about why you can't allow this to go on in Aleppo, America must intervene. And this is, of course, the baloney, the evil baloney we hear from these people all the time. So as Trump's running mate, I thought that was alarming. I would guess everything was planned, but maybe not. Who knows? Maybe he was left to his own devices. Maybe they trusted him and they thought that he would win the debate, and he did win the debate. But What a nasty guy. He even brought up abortion, which is the Republican talking point every 4 years. They talk about it, and then they, of course, do nothing about it. It's just very, I think, just a very repellent guy. I heard enough about Indiana, by the way. I don't want to hear any more about Indiana and what he did in Indiana and all the rest of that stuff. So what a two as I say, state apparatchiks, the sort of people when Hayek talked about the state, he said the worst rise to the top. Well, and last night when the presidential debate, we saw two of the worst. The only thing is these guys have not engaged in massive killing because they've not been the president or not been in a position to head of the CIA or the military or whatever. But who can doubt that they would both happily do it? They would happily have blood on their hands. So two very nasty guys, so unpleasant, so yucky, it's just terrible.
Well, of course, the foreign policy stuff really was the worst because there, as you say, Pence pretty much repudiated anything that Trump might have said that was worthwhile over the years about this stuff. So that's most unfortunate. But then, just when you're getting upset at Pence for doing that, Kane one-ups him in his idiocy by saying, well, you know, Trump, he loves dictators. He loves Putin. He loves Gaddafi. He loves Saddam Hussein. Yeah, I mean, that is really, that's the sort of thing they said about Ron Paul, isn't it? He loves these dictators because he doesn't want to kill their people. You know, that's or because he thinks, look, as bad as the guy is, the point is that now that the guy's gone, things are vastly worse. So again, it's not like for some reason in the left's world, you're always faced with two choices that are clear, and one is good and one is bad. Like either children will work in factories or they'll go to school. No, if the country is that poor, if you take them out of the factory, they'll go into prostitution or starve to death. They're not going to go to school. How idiotic would you have to be to think that? Or likewise, if you think that, well, you know, Gaddafi might have been a jerk, but at least there was still a functioning country at that time people could live in. Okay, there are worse possible. No, it was either Gaddafi or George Washington. They can't think like regular people. It's inane.
But of course, this is just typical warmonger propaganda, right? If you're against the Iraq War, you must love Saddam Hussein. If you're against World War II, you must love Hitler. I mean, this is what they always say. And Pence was in either, I don't know, certainly maybe incapable, certainly didn't want to talk about the fact that Iraq was far better off under Saddam Hussein. There were more than 1 million civilians would have been alive, by the way, and not have been killed. Just as one small point, the whole country would have been devastated, economic conditions vastly worse, and so much property destroyed. The U.S. war crimes in Iraq there's a huge list of them. Gaddafi was not a good guy. These guys are politicians. Of course, they're not good guys. But on the other hand, it's funny. I have always a slight regard for Gaddafi because he wrote a book called The Green Book, which he argued for Muslim anarchism. So he would run these ads in the old days in the Sunday New York Times in about 2-point type, a gigantic full-page ad trying to explain this. I never could, in fact, understand what he was talking about, but I always thought it was funny. And there's no question that Libya was a far better place under Gaddafi. Doesn't mean endorsing Gaddafi. I also like the fact that he made an agreement with Berlusconi to prevent mass migration. And as he said in a speech to the London School of Economics, if I'm taken out, there's going to be vast population movements into Europe. And of course, that's happened. Was that one of the reasons he was taken out? We know that Hillary's a big, in the George Soros tradition, a big advocate of a mass involuntary welfare-funded migration. And who knows? But Libya was, as you say, a livable country. There were functioning cities, functioning oil industry. By the way, just one point about why the U.S. is so anxious to get rid of Gaddafi. He had 80,000 Chinese petroleum engineers and other workers running the oil industry in Libya for him. The first thing the U.S. did after its puppets took over and put Gaddafi to that horrible torture death that Hillary was cackling over was to order out these Chinese that they're going to be killed. and to entirely purge all the contracts that had been signed were undone, and U.S. just flipped out at the idea that the Chinese were involved in oil in Libya. Why? That's the U.S.'s role in the world to run the oil industry. So it, and culturally, economically, just in terms of just everyday life for people. I mean, it was almost infinitely better under Gaddafi, with everything that's wrong with Gaddafi. But I think there's, these people are actually worth looking into. It's not it's always a problem just to buy the U.S. propaganda. Anybody they're really going after, there are other things going on because the U.S. has no problem supporting monsters, funding monsters, whether Joe Stalin or I think all the rest of them. U.S. loves these monsters if they're serving the imperial purpose. So it's not that they think Gaddafi's a bad guy. It's not that they think Saddam Hussein is a bad guy. It's because they want to get rid of him. In both cases, by the way, I'll just make one more point, Tom. In both cases, these guys were anti-jihadists, anti-Islamicists, just like Assad in Syria. Why is it the U.S. wants to kill and destroy the Arab leaders who are anti-jihadist, anti-terrorist? Why is that? Because, of course, they want the terrorism. They want the trouble, just like every empire, divide and conquer. They want to cause trouble, which they believe makes it the U.S. can more easily control things. This is not a nice bunch of guys in Langley or the Pentagon or the White House, and they don't have anybody's interests at heart except their own interests. They couldn't care less about civilians. And as we know, civilians are always the ones killed in wars, and that's certainly true in the U.S. war in Iraq. So I don't know. One of the things Pence said was he seemed to imply that the troops shouldn't have been pulled out of Iraq. And why? Well, they wouldn't sign a status of forces agreement with the U.S. What is the status of forces agreement? It says that any American soldier who commits a crime in Iraq, even if he's in civilian dress and it's on a Saturday night and he rapes some poor woman, this happens, by the way, much more frequently than one might imagine given the U.S. press coverage of it, that he can't be tried. There's no local remedy. He can't be tried in their court system. Only the U.S. has jurisdiction, and I'm sure it'll shock everybody to know there's virtually no punishment for these kinds of crimes. U.S. soldiers and all the military bases around the world are not a bunch of followers of St. Francis of Assisi in any way. They commit a lot of crimes. Not all soldiers commit crimes, but enough of them to cause trouble. So that's why the U.S. wants to make sure never, ever can a U.S. soldier be in the regular court jurisdiction if he commits a crime. He must always be just protected by the U.S. And that's the agreement they couldn't get with Iraq. And I must say, who can blame the Iraqis? But the idea that, as Pence was saying, that really the terrible thing Obama did was to get the troops out of Iraq, or most of the troops. And, of course, it's only part of the U.S. forces there. But very repellent guy, Pence, very repellent guy, Kane, everything they stand for, all their backers throughout their careers. Kane, for example, went to Honduras allegedly as a Jesuit missionary during a year in college, right at the time when the CIA was vastly stepping up its criminal activities in Honduras. And there are those people who believe they have evidence that Kane was working not so much for the cause of Christ, but for the cause of the CIA down there. And this is what led to his, as I guess they would describe it, brilliant career within the state, because he's been a CIA guy since then. If Pence is not a CIA guy, it's because he's too stupid.
That's an interesting line. All right, Lew, I want to get into a little bit of trouble here, I think, by just reading something that a friend of mine said who's, let's just say, well-placed in the media, but maybe not somewhat publicly, somewhat not publicly. I'm not really sure the status of the statement, but it's an interesting statement. And he said the main Democratic talking point out of all this has been that Pence kept denying that Trump said things we know he said. This is genuinely believed by people who genuinely believe their incredibly inaccurate interpretations of Trump's statements are true. They really think he said Mexicans are rapists, Putin is amazing, Russia isn't in Ukraine, and that PTSD-suffering veterans are weak. But none of that is true. Pence was right. Now, this is somebody who is not a Trump supporter. There aren't a lot of Trump supporters over at where this person writes. I'll put it that way. So this is not a Trump supporter. It's just somebody who's sick and tired of people making stuff up. Because obviously Trump didn't. I mean, what would you have to? I mean, what kind of a hysteric would you have to be to think Trump said, all Mexicans are rapists? What does that mean? As soon as you turn 18, you're automatically a rapist if you're in Mexico. Of course, this is so stupid. And the most recent thing, the thing he said about veterans, I don't know how hysterical you'd have to be to spin that into he's saying that our veterans are weak. What he said was, my gosh, what these people are put through, a lot of them just can't handle it when they get home. Well, I've said that on this show. Any anti-war activist has said that's why they have PTSD. They have trouble dealing with the effects, the after effects of what they endured. For heaven's sake, what is wrong with saying that? I mean, what a bunch of delicate flowers everybody's turned into.
No, and I always remember, and of course there are many instances of this sort of thing, but a very eloquent long letter written by a boy who was back from Iraq and tragically committed suicide. And in this letter, he said, I'm not going to say what I did, and I'm not going to say who told me to do it. He said, I feel I have to take the responsibility, but I don't want to get anybody else in trouble. But he said, I just can't live with what I did in Iraq. He said, I can't live with what I did to children and to other civilians in Iraq. Of course, of course, good people can't live with this. God didn't make us to kill other people. That's not supposed to be our role in life. And the fact that it's supposed to be all excusable and, in fact, morally put you on the moral high ground if you're killing people for the U.S. government. Even though I know that the Republicans and the Democrats too, of course, tend to see the U.S. government as a god walking on earth, in Hegel's phrase. So it's very, very sad. And of course, these kids are victims. A lot of them go into the military because of economic conditions. They don't know any better. They're just sort of entrapped at the most high testosterone point of life, and they're easily tricked into this stuff. And nobody comes back from this. Now, I've obviously not met everybody by any means, but I've met a lot of the guys who were in Iraq and Afghanistan, and I'll tell you, not one of them. And they were not all anti-war, by the way. Not one of them thinks it was a great thing. Thinks he did great. He was so proud of his service, and they all, in fact, all the ones I've ever met, don't want to be thanked for their service. They hate the whole worship of the military. So maybe this is a difficult point to make after hearing Pence last night. But I've always thought that if somebody, obviously Trump, how shall I put this, is not a libertarian. But if somebody who was a Republican and was not as crazed a warmonger as the typical Republican wanted to get the Republican nomination, how would you go about it? Well, for one thing, you'd say, we're going to take care of the veterans, we're going to help the veterans, protect the veterans, and we're going to make our military strong. However, there's nothing about using it against anybody. So I think that maybe just a political calculation. I don't know. I never met Trump, of course, and I can't look into his heart, but. He has really gotten the pro-veteran point. Hillary, of course, nobody in the military likes Hillary, and it's not for any virtue of hers. They can't stand her. So they want to take down Trump on the veterans issue, which he's pretty. And of course, the Veterans Administration is a socialist system. It's a single-payer system. It's a total monstrosity, extremely expensive. Virtually no service to the sick, and the guys who've lost legs and arms and have brain damage and all the horrific things they come back with. So the answer is not to fund the VA better. There are probably things that could be done even within the Republican Party, where you'd maybe go back to the old Champa system, which was where veterans could go to a regular doctor. I'm not an advocate of anybody being on the payroll like that, but it would be far better. The whole veterans thing is absolutely a disaster. And anybody who has by the way, I recommend. I've only done this once. I recommend to anybody if you get a chance, visit a VA hospital, and if you think here's socialism. It's an island of socialism in the United States. This VA system. It really is horrific, depressing, scary, Just and the idea that we're all supposed to be put into such a system, Bernie Sanders and Hillary and so forth, and probably Obama's real view, is frightening, awful. And a friend of mine who was a public school teacher in Ohio got fired for this. But he was sick and tired of the fact that the high school was always bringing in all the military recruiters to talk to the kids. He thought it was terrible that nobody was being told the truth. So he took the kids who wanted to go with him to visit a VA hospital. He said, we'll go look. Let's talk to these guys who were wounded. And so he was immediately canned. I mean, the school board voted him out, and he was vilified in the local press and so forth, because you're not allowed to see this stuff. It's a great thing for high school students to do. I did it when I was a high school student, and it leaves a lifelong mark on you to see one of the results. We never, of course, get to see the far worse results of what happens to the so-called enemy. All the horrendous number of spontaneous abortions and deformed children born from the U.S. So-called depleted uranium weapons. All the old people who've died from starvation thanks to U.S. sanctions, all the sick who died thanks to U.S. sanctions, all the people bombed, droned. The Lancet, I think, had the most, and this is some years ago, but they thought there were 1 million civilians who'd been killed by the U.S. and Britain and the rest of the criminals in Iraq. So if indeed Trump is less likely to start a war, and I must say that's only my hope, it's certainly not my knowledge. But boy, we don't want Pence anywhere any more than we want Kane anywhere near the throne in the White House, because Pence is both stupid and evil, and he's a politician, right? I mean, only who but Ron Paul doesn't fall into either the smart and evil or the stupid and evil categories of people who've been politicians for a long time. By the way, I'll mention one other thing. There was a lot of criticism of both these guys for not answering the question, although, of course, the moderator, who was pro-Kane, kept blaming Pence for this. Like typical politicians, they didn't answer the question. They answered the question they wish they'd gotten. The only guy I've ever encountered in politics who always answered the question was Ron Paul. And it's because, of course, he knew what he believed. He had all the facts at his fingertips. He didn't hesitate to tell what he really believed. He didn't hesitate to tell the truth. So if there's anything that makes you miss Ron Paul in the public arena, it's watching two guys like this last night.
Yeah, I know. And, even if I were purely Machiavellian, I might still consider answering the question simply for the sake of product differentiation. Everybody will notice I'm the only one doing it. That's got to count for something at some level. Well, Lew, let's wrap this up. I think let's never speak of it again. Even if we're sitting around in person, this will not be raised. But I am really, everybody's grateful to you for sitting there and sitting through this. So I think we've earned a day off for the next debate. I think because we did this, I of course want people to check out LewRockwell.com if they're not already doing that. But while you're there, of course, make sure and click on Political Theater, which is one of Lew's 2 blogs. This is one Lew does entirely on his own without any other contributors. And I just love that Political Theater blog. All kinds of interesting items that I just would not have found elsewhere. So everybody check that out. Check out TomWoods.com/752. I'm going to link to previous episodes I've done with Lew, as well as to Lew's site and blog. Thanks again, Lew. We'll see you not quite next time, but the time after that.
Tom, we'll have a good time then, and thanks so much for having me on.
All right, a couple quick things before I let you go for today. First, another site created by a listener. This is a podcast site. This is a podcast that's sort of on the new side. It's the Scottish Liberty Podcast, and you can check it out at, guess what? ScottishLibertyPodcast.com. Although it's coming to you from Scotland, it covers issues of importance all over the world and includes commentary about what's going on in the United States. So it's fun to get the Scottish perspective. All kinds of topics covered. Nothing is off the table. Maybe not every topic is suitable for work, but what are you doing broadcasting podcasts at work after all anyway? So check out ScottishLibertyPodcast.com. I'll link to that as the listener website mentioned at TomWoods.com/752. Remember, if you're starting up a site, you get all kinds of glorious goodies, including membership in my exclusive private bloggers Facebook group, where we plan and plot together and help each other. We got over 100 members in there, plus just all kinds of goodies. Wait till you see the goodies. They're at tomwoods.com/publicity. So check that out before you get your hosting. You get all these goodies. All right, let's see what's coming up. I think I got some pretty good stuff coming up here. I've got Rosa Brooks. I don't know what order I'm going to do this in, but I got Rosa Brooks coming up. She's the author of How Everything Became War and the Military Became Everything. Intriguing. Going to be doing an episode, if all goes well, on Singapore, looking at Singapore from a libertarian perspective. Hunter Lewis comes back to the show. He's got a new book on where Bernie Sanders went wrong. Doug Casey, the famed investor, likewise has a new book. We'll be talking to Doug. I've got a debate on fractional reserve banking. Yes, don't make fun of me. People who listen to this show like that kind of thing. There's nothing wrong with that. That's going to be fun. That's going to be coming up in the middle of next week. That's going to be episode 757. So we got some good stuff coming up here. There's no getting around it. So make sure you have subscribed to the show. Got the whole catalog of episodes all on one page at tomwoods.com/episodes. Thanks for listening.
Become a smarter libertarian in just 30 minutes a day. Visit tomwoods.com to subscribe to the show for free, and we'll see you next time.